The man first noticed the lion because of how still he was. Not crouched in cover or pacing the brush, but standing in open ground near the narrow human trail, his large body held upright as if locked in place. The distance between them was wrong. Lions avoided this space. They melted back into grass long before a person came close. This one did not move. His chest rose and fell unevenly, each breath visible through the ribs beneath his tawny coat, and his tail hung low, barely stirring. The man slowed his steps without thinking, the way people do when they sense something fragile rather than dangerous. As the space closed, the lion's ears shifted back, not flat in warning but angled in uncertainty. His head dipped slightly, then lifted again as if the effort of holding it steady required concentration. The man saw the stiffness in the shoulders, the way the weight favored one hind leg. This was not an animal guarding territory or asserting presence. It was an animal unsure whether standing its ground was safer than retreat. The lion's eyes followed every movement, wide and glassy, not locked with challenge but flickering with fatigue. A low sound escaped his chest, not a roar, just air pressed through a throat that seemed tight with strain. The trail itself was quiet. Dust lay undisturbed except for the lion's own tracks, circling, overlapping, evidence of time spent pacing a decision. The smell of humans lingered faintly, carried by boots and fabric and days-old sweat, usually enough to push predators deeper into cover. Instead, the lion remained. His breathing grew faster as the man stopped, the muscles along his flank trembling in small waves. Fear showed not as aggression but as restraint held too long. The lion wanted space, yet something kept him rooted there. The man lowered himself slowly, reducing his height, keeping his hands open and still. He watched the lion's chest, the rhythm of breath, the way each inhale seemed shallow, careful. A thin line of saliva clung at the corner of the lion's mouth, stretching and breaking as his jaw shifted. Flies gathered at a small dark patch near the belly where the fur lay matted. The injury was not dramatic, just enough to change everything. Enough to make hunting difficult. Enough to drain strength day by day. The lion took one step forward, then stopped as if surprised by his own movement. His paws pressed into the dust, claws barely visible, not flexed to strike but braced to hold balance. The man did not move. He spoke once, quietly, more breath than voice. "Easy now." The sound carried, gentle and brief. The lion's ears twitched at it, his gaze fixing for a moment before drifting again. He exhaled slowly, a long release that shuddered through his body. Minutes passed without either advancing. The lion's posture softened almost imperceptibly. His head lowered another fraction, shoulders sagging as the effort of standing became harder to maintain. He sat awkwardly, one leg extended, chest still heaving. The choice to remain was itself a kind of reaching out, not for contact but for tolerance. The man shifted only when necessary, easing backward, signaling no threat, no pursuit. The lion watched, eyes following until distance returned to the space between them. As the sun began to dip, the light thinned and stretched, turning the grass pale gold. The lion lay down fully at last, his breathing slowing as the heat eased. In the distance, wind moved through the savanna in long, quiet waves, and somewhere far beyond the trail, life continued its steady motion, unaware of the moment that had just passed. The space between them narrowed without either moving toward the other. It closed instead through patience, through the man remaining where he was while the lion's strength slowly bled away. From this nearer distance, the signs that had been subtle became unmistakable. The lion's flank shuddered with each breath, and the rise of his chest lagged behind the fall, as if his lungs struggled to keep pace with the demand placed on them. His eyes, once sharp and assessing, dulled at the edges, blinking more often now, fighting a heaviness that pulled at them. The injury revealed itself in fragments. A darkened patch beneath his belly where the fur clumped together, stiff with dried blood. A faint metallic scent carried on the warm air. When the lion shifted his weight, his body tightened instinctively, muscles bracing around pain he could no longer ignore. The wound was deep, torn rather than cut, the kind left by hooves or horns. It had not killed him quickly. It had done something worse. It had slowed him, weakened him, turned each passing hour into a negotiation between survival and collapse. The man stayed where he was, knees bent, back straight, his presence steady and predictable. He understood that this balance depended on stillness. Any sudden movement, any change in posture, could unravel the fragile thread keeping the lion from fleeing or forcing himself into a final, desperate charge. The man watched the animal's breathing, the tremor that traveled along the spine, the way the tail twitched once and then fell still again. This was not a standoff. It was a pause carved out of exhaustion. Around them, the land remained indifferent. Insects hummed low over the grass. The trail lay quiet, pale dust catching the light. A breeze moved through the open ground, lifting the lion's mane just enough to expose the curve of his neck, slick with sweat. His ears rotated slowly, tracking sounds that no longer held urgency. The effort of vigilance was slipping beyond him. His body sank further into the earth, forelegs folding beneath his weight with a controlled heaviness, as if lying down were a careful act that required planning. When the lion attempted to adjust his position, a soft, involuntary sound escaped his chest, more air than voice. His jaw tightened. The man felt the shift instantly and stilled even more, lowering his gaze, offering nothing that could be taken as pressure. He spoke once, barely above the wind. "I won't come closer." The words were not meant to reassure the lion in any human sense. They were simply placed into the quiet, another element of calm. The lion's breathing slowed, uneven but deeper now. His head rested against the ground, cheek pressed into dust. His eyes remained open, watching through half-lidded focus, registering movement without urgency. The injury pulsed beneath the skin, heat radiating from it, draining strength with each beat of his heart. Hunger, thirst, pain, and fear braided together, leaving little energy for anything else. Approaching the trail had not been a choice made from courage or curiosity. It had been the narrowing of options. The man waited, measuring time not in minutes but in breaths. The light softened as afternoon leaned toward evening, shadows stretching thin and long. Somewhere far off, birds lifted and settled again. The lion remained where he was, no longer standing, no longer advancing, simply existing in the quiet space between flight and rest, as the wind moved gently through the grass and the day slowly began to let go. What changed was not sudden. It came in small concessions, each one subtle enough that it could have been missed if the man had not been watching so closely. The lion's head turned away first, breaking the line of direct attention. His breathing deepened, still uneven but less hurried, and his shoulders loosened as if the effort of holding himself upright had finally become heavier than the fear of what lay nearby. Then, slowly, deliberately, he lowered himself fully to the ground. The motion was careful, almost ceremonial. The lion folded his front legs beneath his chest, paused, then eased his weight onto one side. As he shifted, the injured area became visible, no longer hidden by posture or angle. The torn flesh beneath his belly pulled slightly as he moved, darkened and swollen, the edges raw where healing had failed to begin. He did not attempt to shield it. Instead, he lay still, the wound exposed to open air, dust clinging to the damp fur around it. The man felt the change immediately, though nothing about the surroundings had altered. The air carried the same warmth, the same low sounds of insects and wind. But the tension that had held his muscles taut eased by degrees. This was not collapse. It was choice. Predators did not reveal weakness unless there was nothing left to lose, or unless the risk of hiding it had grown greater than the risk of being seen. The lion's eyes flicked back toward him, then drifted away again as if the effort of watching had become optional. The man remained exactly where he was. He did not shift his weight. He did not raise his hands. He allowed the space between them to stay intact, untouched. Trust, he knew, was not something that could be asked for. It had to be allowed to surface on its own, fragile and easily broken. He focused on his breathing, keeping it slow, matching the pace of the moment rather than forcing it forward. The lion's body settled further into the earth. His flank rose and fell, each breath tugging faintly at the injured skin. A soft sound escaped him, a low exhale that carried no warning, only release. His tail lay still behind him, the tip resting against the dust. Flies gathered again, drawn by scent and warmth, and he flicked an ear once, weakly, then stopped trying. Conserving energy had become instinctive now. Time stretched. The sun shifted, light sliding across the grass and softening at the edges. The man watched the lion's eyes, how they closed briefly, then opened again, never fully surrendering to rest. Pain pulsed in waves, visible in the tightening of muscles beneath the skin, in the way the lion's jaw clenched and relaxed. Still he did not rise. He did not retreat. He stayed. The man spoke only once more, his voice low and even. "Take your time." The words were less for the lion than for the moment itself, an acknowledgement that nothing would be rushed. The sound drifted across the space between them and settled there, unchallenged. The lion's ear turned slightly toward it, then eased back into place. What lay between them now was not dominance or submission, but a quiet agreement shaped by exhaustion and restraint. The lion had placed his body on the ground and left it there, exposed and vulnerable in a way that ran against every instinct that had kept him alive until this point. The man answered not with movement, not with approach, but with patience, letting the lion remain in control of what came next. As the light thinned and the air cooled, the grass whispered softly in the breeze. The lion remained stretched along the earth, breathing, enduring, while the day leaned toward evening and the long shadows gathered around them, holding the stillness intact. The shift came not from the man but from the lion himself. After a long stretch of stillness, his body stirred with a slow, deliberate effort. Muscles tightened and released as he drew his forelegs closer beneath him, gathering what little strength remained. His breathing grew heavier for a moment, each inhale pulling against the injury, but he continued. With careful precision, he dragged his body forward a short distance, the movement leaving a faint mark in the dust behind him. He stopped when the space between them had narrowed to something intimate and unguarded. Then, in a motion stripped of hesitation, the lion lowered his head until his forehead touched the ground. It was not collapse, not weakness overtaking him. It was intentional. His mane brushed the earth, his nose resting inches from the man's boots, breath warming the dust between them. The gesture lasted only a moment, but it carried weight far heavier than its duration. The man did not react outwardly. Inside, he felt the gravity of what had just been offered. Predators did not bow. They did not lower themselves into the reach of another being unless driven by need beyond instinct. The lion's eyes closed briefly as his head rested there, his body going still again, as though he had placed something fragile down and was waiting to see if it would be taken or left untouched. The land around them seemed to hold its breath. The wind eased, leaving the grass barely stirring. Insects hummed at a lower pitch, their movements subdued by the cooling air. The sun hovered just above the horizon, casting long bands of amber light that stretched across the ground and wrapped both figures in the same quiet glow. Nothing intruded. Nothing hurried them. The man shifted only enough to ease the tension in his legs, careful that the movement was slow, predictable. He lowered himself fully to the ground, mirroring the lion's posture, reducing himself further. His hands remained open, resting against the earth. He waited for any sign of alarm, any tightening of muscle or flicker of warning. There was none. The lion's breathing continued, shallow but steady, his head still pressed to the soil. When the man finally reached forward, it was with restraint shaped by years of understanding animals on their own terms. His hand moved no closer than the lion's paw, stopping well short of contact. He let it rest there, visible, offering presence without intrusion. "I'm here," he said softly, the words barely lifting above the quiet. The lion did not flinch. His ear twitched once, acknowledging sound without fear. Pain rippled through the lion's body in subtle waves, visible in the tightening of his flank and the faint quiver beneath his skin. Still he did not withdraw. His head remained lowered, mane spreading across the dust, surrender held carefully, as if even this posture required strength he could not afford to waste. Trust here was not confidence. It was exhaustion meeting patience. The man stayed with him, measuring each second, each breath, letting the lion decide what would come next. Help could not be forced. It had to be accepted. The man understood that crossing the final distance would come only when the lion was ready, if he ever was. For now, being present was enough. As the sun slipped lower, the light softened into deeper gold, and long shadows braided together across the grass. Somewhere far away, a bird called once, then fell silent. The lion's head lifted just enough to draw a deeper breath before settling again, his weight fully surrendered to the earth, while the land around them remained hushed, as though witnessing something rare and unrepeatable. The change did not come all at once. It arrived gradually, almost imperceptibly, carried on steadier breaths and the quiet return of tension to muscles that had slackened too far. The lion's chest rose more evenly now, the long pauses between breaths shortening as air moved through him with less resistance. His eyes opened fully, clearer than before, tracking the movement of light as it shifted across the ground. Strength did not flood back into him. It gathered slowly, carefully, like something being rationed. After a long while, he lifted his head from the earth. The motion was deliberate, measured against pain that still lived beneath the skin. His neck trembled briefly before settling, mane sliding back into place. He remained there for a moment, testing the world again from this higher angle. The man did not move. He watched, aware that this was not a departure yet, only a consideration. The lion drew his forelegs beneath him and paused. Muscles engaged in sequence, each one answering cautiously as though remembering their purpose. When he pushed himself upright, it was without haste, his body rising in stages rather than a single motion. The injured leg bore weight reluctantly, but it bore it. A faint stiffness lingered in his gait, yet it no longer ruled him. He stood, tall again though thinner now, marked by what he had endured. He turned his head once toward the man. The look was brief, unreadable, absent of challenge or appeal. It was simply acknowledgement. The man felt it settle into him, quiet and heavy. He did not lift a hand or offer sound. Nothing was required. The lion then turned away, angling his body toward the open plains where the grass stretched long and uninterrupted, where distance promised solitude rather than threat. Each step carried him farther from the trail, his form gradually softening into the landscape. The stiffness eased as he walked, stride lengthening, movement becoming more familiar with each pace. He did not look back again. Predators did not linger. What had passed belonged to the moment it occupied, nothing more. The man remained where he was, seated on the ground, dust clinging to his clothes. He felt the absence immediately, the space where the lion had been now filled only with wind and light. His body stayed still long after the lion disappeared from view, as if movement might disturb what had just been sealed into memory. Encounters like this did not announce their meaning. They revealed it later, slowly. Around him, the land resumed its quiet rhythms. Insects lifted and settled. Grass bent and straightened under the breeze. The trail lay unchanged, indifferent to what had unfolded beside it. The man stood at last, brushing dust from his hands, aware that something in him had shifted, though it would take time to understand how. He did not follow. He did not mark the place. Some things were not meant to be documented beyond the body that carried them away. He turned in the opposite direction, leaving the plains open and undisturbed. As the sun lowered, the sky softened into layers of amber and pale blue. Light spilled across the grass in long, fading bands, and the wind moved through it with a low, steady whisper. Far out on the horizon, something stirred, perhaps a distant shape, perhaps only shadow, but it passed without sound, leaving behind only the evening and the quiet weight of trust that needed no words to endure.